This is Talkish. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at hallicasserjayne.com. Let's get to it. Today on episode 319 of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, I bring you a conversation with a personal friend of mine, Franz Sedelmayer, a man who knows Russian President Vladimir Putin intimately, a man who is tangled with Putin in a court and is one of the few to have beat him in the judiciary. As we approach the Trump-Putin summit, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what lies ahead, and a look into the character of Putin. So stay tuned. We've got a lot to get to. So let's. On July 16th, President Donald Trump is scheduled to travel to Helsinki, Finland, to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin for a summit. The meeting could not be any more controversial in light of Russia's interference in the 2016 election, which many think is the reason Donald Trump is president. And certainly fueling the fire is the Mueller probe into whether or not Trump colluded with the Russians to gain power and then obstructed justice to hide the truth. Joining me at my table today is Franz J. Sedelmeyer, a former friend of President Vladimir Putin's and the only individual to sue and collect money from Vladimir Putin's Russia. Franz Sedelmeyer's unique story told in his book, Welcome to Putingrad, the incredible story of the only man to collect money from Vladimir Putin. A little background on Sedelmeyer. At the age of 26, Franz Sedelmeyer traveled to St. Petersburg, Russia, and in a short period of time built an enormously successful police supply and training company. Who was one of young Sedelmeyer's big supporters? The young deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, a former KGB lieutenant colonel. His name? Vladimir Putin. The two young men formed a bond, and at Putin's request, Sedelmeyer created and trained the KGB's first Western-style SWAT team. But then, Sedelmeyer's Russian company was expropriated by President Boris Johnson and his ambitious political and ruthless one-time friend, Vladimir Putin. Why did Putin sell out his close friend? Was Putin paid off? In fact, shortly thereafter, Putin landed his first Moscow post. Not to take what happened sitting down, Franz Sedelmeyer went into battle to retrieve his assets and won. But Russia refused to pay damages. Undeterred, Sedelmeyer persevered, waging a 20-year campaign against the Kremlin and its current president, Vladimir Putin, his former friend. It's a unique story, and because of it, Sedelmeyer can offer a rare insight into the mindset of the Russian president. Let's talk with Franz Sedelmeyer. So it's always nice to have you here, Franz. Welcome back. You weren't able to hear my intro, but of course I cited your credentials and briefly told the great story of how you came to your friendship with Mr. Putin and what happened when that friendship fell apart. Talked about your wonderful book, Welcome to Putingrad, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit more as we go along here. Listeners can, by the way, you can go back to the HalliCasser-JayneShow.com and find my first interview with Franz, which gives you the whole story about how Putin and he met and their relationship, but a small substitute for this wonderful book that he wrote, Welcome to Putingrad. So let's get started with a broad overview of what's going to happen on July 16th at the summit. Your overall thoughts, substance or show, opportunity for something to real happen, what?
You know, I think when you look at the intent here, there's two things at play. Number one, Mr. Trump obviously is more interested in a better relationship with Mr. Putin than Mr. Putin is. And I think that's pretty much what I would expect from that meeting. I do not expect Mr. Putin to move on any issue that might be important for the West or for the United States.
Interesting. You know, we're pretty deep into this Trump presidency. Time flies when you're having a lousy time.
I love it.
You know me. I call him like I see him. There's a cloud hanging over everything. There's the Bob Mueller investigation into the obstruction of justice. And, of course, whether or not Putin did try to influence the election and whether or not Trump knew it and colluded or not. You believe what and why?
You know, it is a given that the Russians are trying to influence politics anywhere. It's not just the United States. It's also true for Europe. I mean, take a look at the elections in Czechia. You got a Putin friend there look at Hungary, look at the Brexit, look at the Catalan independence movement. They're supporting any alt-left, any alt-right party, anybody who is against Europe, the European Union, anyone that takes a stand or tries to disturb the network in NATO. So it's something that they do. It's in their DNA, and they will not knock it off just because a couple of American politicians and congressmen say they should no longer do that. It's just something that they do.
We do it too. Do we do it as badly or maybe less effectively than they were in the 2016 election? What are your thoughts about that?
I honestly, and ever since the wall came down, I cannot see the United States really mingling into other people's politics except for making a statement, what they expect the country to do, or, the respecting of democracy and human rights, etc. I mean, that is a line that has been going on for a long time, but we are far away from a Chile-type, Pinochet-type scenario where they're trying to involve themselves into the nitty-gritty of elections and, possibly throwing someone over. That just doesn't happen anymore. So
you don't think that Obama, having sent some of his people over to Israel, for instance, to get Netanyahu out, that's not maybe on the side of government so much as it is on the individual? I think that's more of a political campaigning. Okay. And every country has its foundations that are into that. I mean, the Germans, each major German party, be conservative, social democrats, the Greens, or what you have, they all have foundations that have offices in other countries that engage in what they say is a civil discourse, And so that's a given. There's always a political influence, but if it's a destabilizing influence, I dare to challenge that. Absolutely. So you're thinking this was a destabilizing influence that he attempted in 2016, and clearly even Congress, both sides of the aisle, admit that it was successful to some degree. I mean, they're scared to death to go too far, I think. A lot of it has to do with they're afraid of a civil war. Well, again, when you take this thing into context, the Russians might have spent 20, 30, or 40 million in Twitter messages, in Facebook stuff, in social media campaigns, in what do you call trolls, etc. The question is, how much influence does it have in a $2 billion presidential race? I mean, I think there's more written on this thing in the press, and there's more discussions going on than they should credit them for. That is my opinion. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that's where you were on it. I tend to be a little bit more in the belief that they did do undue influence, and half that story is not even told yet. So you wouldn't think that Trump is compromised? I don't think Trump is compromised. I also don't think the Russians hold much dirt on him. I think the worst-case scenario is that Trump could look at if it turns out that there's more Russian funds in his enterprises than he would like to have people believe, and that there might be a certain problem with his finances if they would one day decide to ask for the money back. I think that's really on Mr. Trump's mind. It is a business angle, and that is a situation that has come about way before he became president. I do not think that the Steele dossier and the other things have anything, anything serious in there. This is a collection of rumors. As far as the Russians are concerned, I'm talking Putin, intel services, etc. These guys feel really proud of themselves because they managed to get this information into the Steele report. This thing got leaked, unconfirmed as it is. It's in the public sphere, and people are still talking about it. But do I believe there's any truth to that? Not really. Besides, if you go and investigate something like this, and you rely on sources in Russia, you never know where that information comes from, if it's really real. So in your opinion, is the Mueller investigation a bunch of hooey and a waste of time?
Well, it's one of these things, you know. I would think it usually goes down with the typical FBI type investigation, where the actual crime doesn't materialize, but the only thing that can stick things on is mail fraud, is witness tampering, is obstruction of justice, that type of stuff. Things that happen when people try to cover their behind, so to speak, and sometimes advertently or inadvertently.
About that money thing, which I don't think should be tossed out. There was a reason that Trump wouldn't reveal his tax returns. God knows what's in there. This could be in there. There's a whole lot of stuff about Trump and money and when he couldn't get financing from anybody, but maybe the Russians or the Greeks or wherever the money was buried. But that does influence how a person would make a decision if it means that their entire empires could be overturned by truth. Yes?
Yes, that's true. But on the other hand, he's in that case, he would walk a very fine line, the line between private interest and treason. And I think that there's many things you can do in America, but if someone looks at you as unpatriotic because of your business interests, that is a line you should never cross, and I think he knows that.
Are you a fan of Trump's or not? I've never asked you. Point blank.
I'm looking. Let me put it this way: I'm sitting in a very comfortable chair. I'm German. I look at this as an observer. I totally get why people, some people, not everybody, but many people like Trump, because he's trying to rattle the establishment in D.C. He's touching many issues that have been on American people's mind. It all starts with things like political correctness. Many people say there's too much of that out there. You can't say anything anymore. You can't tell a joke anymore without insulting anyone, without upsetting anyone. And there's a disconnect between Washington and Congress and the people. And there's generally a lot of frustration out there. So I think people like Mr. Trump shaking up things. I think some of his ideas are not necessarily all bad, but I think he has a problem communicating what he's doing, which, again, there's another side to it, too, which Mr. Obama faced also, or Mr. Bush, or anybody before him. And that is this total partisanship that exists in America that actually really you could sometimes describe even as a type of hate between, the two poles, the more liberal and the more conservative, and then you have the religious aspect also, which I think has nothing to do in politics anyway. And so it's something where I always say what Mr. Trump is starting right now, we're going to deal with the next 25, 30 years from now.
So from your European perch, you're soon to be a full-time American, but from your European perch, how are we looking right now?
I think the Europeans, many people outside America do not understand what goes on inside America. They don't understand why Mr. Trump has so much support. They also don't understand the partisanship of things, because it seems to be that even on some of the easiest things, people no longer agree. They cannot find a consensus in Congress anymore to push agendas forward. So they sort of rely on presidential decrees, for lack of better legislation. And I guess that rings true for many of the other international leaders.
Well, let me put this in perspective, though, because you've been watching this game all over your many years on this earth. Have you ever seen Europe look at the U.S. with such, oh my God, what the hell is going on there, as they are right now?
Yes.
Or you have?
I think that's a fair point to make, that it's probably a more serious situation in that sense than it has ever been before. On the other hand side, the Europeans are so busy with their own stuff right now. For example, the risk of Europe, the European Union falling to pieces. What's going on with the Brexit. Boris Johnson just resigned yesterday, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of England. because they can't, even in England, they can't agree on a course how to leave the European Union. That shows you in what predicament we are in at the moment in Europe.
I think these are the most fascinating times ever. And I don't think any place in the world right now is sane, because I don't think people are sane. And my theory is that all of the pollution is making us nuts, not to mention the internet and being plugged into electronics all day long. But let's put that aside for a little while. Let's go back to why I really wanted to talk to you, and that's about this President Putin. Is he running circles around the U.S.?
I think he is. But again, it's something, he's running on the surface. He does not manage to penetrate because he's not getting any real results out of it, except that he upsets everybody. And he upsets the relationships the United States has with other countries. But as far as something positive for Russia, for himself as a successful president, and his cronies around, most of them are corrupt anyway, that there's no gain. There's no gain in that sense. Just by going into Syria and bombing the hell out of everything that moves on the ground, excuse me for my language, this is not going to help him with his problems at home.
Well, now, he said he's finished. This is his last term, so to speak. But what's he up to then? If he's not getting anything back for what he's doing, he's just doing it for blood sport? What?
No, he's looking for a way to exit. He's looking to make himself so important that, they're going to let him live in peace after he steps down from office. And my feeling is that's not going to happen. And people totally misread Putin. He's not the long-term strategist. He's not the medium-term strategist. One reason he surprises us all the time, because he surprises himself every day. He doesn't know what to do tomorrow. And he's desperately trying to hold on to control. His nightmare is that he would be overthrown, that he would be locked up, that he would be called in front of a public court. He's looking for a way to get out of this role. But so far, I don't see that there's not much of a chance that this will happen. So the only thing he can do is stay in there, keep on upsetting everyone, keep on creating crises that will keep the people around him busy, including his own population.
He's not in any danger of being overthrown or anything like that. So I'm not sure that he's just a paranoid soul.
He's a paranoid soul on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, his power rests on the fact that he's surrounding himself with people that help themselves to the riches of Russia. In other words, deep-rooted institutional corruption.
Gee, sounds like Trump, by the way.
Wow, I don't think it's that bad in America.
Oh, my God.
Say.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
With him, it's more or less distribution of money among his buddies. I mean, how the sentence goes. For my enemies, the law, and for my friends, everything. Well, that's exactly how he runs the place.
Right. Let me just interject because clearly that's exactly what Trump is up to. He gives a tax break to the wealthy, and he gives crumbs to the whatever. He's got a cabinet that they're making gazillions of dollars. His own daughter right now, when he's putting tariffs on China, he forget that. He doesn't give her a tariff. Her goods will be fine and dandy. I don't know. It sounds to me, in maybe a different way, a different style of it, that he's not doing anything differently than Putin is doing.
I can give you that, but the big difference is this in America right now, this is lawful to do that. That's the law. In Russia, they violate the law every single day, and that's what makes it different. But what I was going to say, why Putin actually has a problem at the moment, his deal is falling to pieces with his oligarch friends and everybody that helps themselves in return for supporting him. And that is the fact that they no longer can control their funds outside Russia. They have to be afraid that the West is blocking funds. In other words, they have no access to their funds outside anymore. And that is a game changer, because Putin's Russia is not about ideology. It's not about democracy. It's not about the rule of law. It's just about money. And when the money part gets upset, even Mr. Putin is is getting to be an endangered person.
Makes him vulnerable. Well, one question about Trump, and that is, he keeps turning his cheek and even siding with Putin. What are your thoughts on that?
Like I say, Mr. Trump is more interested in a good relationship with Mr. Putin than Mr. Putin is interested in having a good relationship with him.
Because?
Again, my theory on that, it has to do with the prior dealings with Russian funds that now are in Mr. Trump's companies. That's the only explanation that I have.
Okay, well, that's a good one. I want to talk about Paul Manafort for just a second. Was he a Putin plant? Was he? What's the deal there?
Oh, he's definitely a Russian asset. There's no question about it. He did the Kremlin's bidding in Ukraine. He was supporting Yanukovych, who was, basically the next best thing the Russians could have installed in Ukraine. And Manafort was active down there for a long time. He has handled lots of cash. He has been peddling influence on Ukrainian elections to make sure a Kremlin-friendly person is installed. So he's definitely a Russian asset.
Okay, so he also changed some of the program of the Republican Party concerning Russia during the election. Question.
Yeah.
On what do you think Trump knew about Manafort? Why did he hire him? When did he know it? And is that the pity of it all?
Well, the pity of it all is that Mr. Trump hires many people. Many of them don't last a month, as we know from the White House. So a White House insider, a friend of mine for many years, basically told me the problem that they had in the White House and also in the campaign is there's no discipline. This is not what Putin would describe as the vertical of power.
Right.
Everybody seems to cook his own little soupchik, as the Russians would put it. And I think that shows. Now, if you ask me if Trump knew what Manafort was up to or who he also was loyal to, my guess would be if he would have known, he probably would not have hired Manafort. But the moment Manafort became a problem, he also got ditched rather quickly.
Well, my theory about all of this is, and I tweet this all the time, which you, I'm sure, have seen me do, it doesn't matter whether he knew or he didn't know, because it got you to, there's a man in the White House who's completely an idiot. How could you not know?
Well, again, I think when you talk about Trump as a person, as a personality, you will have what I would describe as a little bit of a narcissist.
A little?
And a little, big. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but that's something that I can see. He has a great time talking to crowds. He has a great time communicating in front of camera, shooting out really nasty Twitter messages sometimes. And so he enjoys his ride. He enjoys to be important. At the same time, you can ask anyone in the intel world you want. The worst person to recruit ever as an asset is someone who has a narcissistic streak about him. It just is impossible, practically. And that is the part where I would say Mr. Trump is a business person. He is what I would call street smart or Wall Street smart in that sense when it comes to real estate stuff. He's always exaggerating. He always is, he wants to make sure he's recognized, etc., which is something very similar to what Putin does. Putin is a different character in the sense that he's a better communicator. He can time his communications. Mr. Trump does not do that because he's very much a stomach person. And he just, he says what he has to say at the spur of the moment. Pardon me. And I think that's the big difference between them. But I would not call either one stupid. I would just, they're both trapped in their character and they can't get out of it.
Oh, God. Oh, that's a cartoon. I just see that cartoon. Let me go draw. Let me throw out what Time Magazine has said about the meeting. No matter what happens in Helsinki, Putin has already won. Has Putin already won?
if Putin would have already won, we wouldn't see any more activity from the Russians. And as we all know, we have seen lots of activity. I mean, I think I sent you a list of people that were assassinated and either were killed or barely survived over the time period Mr. Trump got into office. I mean, I'm talking Russian opposition, and my body count or head count is 18 ever since the inauguration of Mr. Trump. So that alone shows you how much Putin is interested in holding on to power and how much he's afraid of any type of opposition, be it as small as it is, irrelevant of where it would take place. He will go after these people.
You're listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is Putin expert Franz Sedelmayer, the author of the insightful Welcome to Putingrad, the incredible story of the only man to collect money from Vladimir Putin. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcast. Be sure to find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Trump has an affinity for crooks, which is why his cabinet fell as quickly as it did. And he has a problem with these hires. I mean, instinctually, he just likes a crook. I mean, that's how he rolls in the world, being crooked all the time, skating that fine line between what's allowed and what's legal and what's not. And I get that. I think that Putin has a different kind of MO there because I think Putin is, I don't know, maybe more ruthless, less business-oriented. He's people-oriented. He controls by the humanity that he controls. Trump likes to do it with money. But I want to say this, unless you wanted to add something to that. There are specifics that need to be discussed in this meeting. One of them is the arms race. Another one is sanctions relief. I mean, when Putin goes into this, because they could have done this on the phone. I mean, so the two narcissists are going to be up there with the cameras clicking away, and hitting every page how happy they are. People in the U.S., some people in the half of the U.S. looking at it and going, look, he's sitting there with the man who owns him. But what about this? What about the specifics of what's going to be discussed there and the arms race? Are we going to get Go, talk.
I don't think arms race is going to even come up as a big issue, to be honest with you, because both of them are not interested to reduce an arsenal or to look weak or to sort of play the peace pigeon. They're not interested in that. I think there is going to be this one agenda where you're going to have people talk about Crimea, the conflict in eastern Ukraine, the Russian influence in Syria and other places in the Middle East, etc. I think that's going to be a major issue, and without a resolution to that, there will not be any progress in U.S.-Russian relations. So the arms race is way out there, but it's not going to be an important thing for this one.
So this relationship between, let me say it two ways, the United States of America and Russia, and then there's the other relationship, Putin and Trump. Are they the same? Are they different?
I think they're different. There's this, cowboy-type thing going on between Trump and Putin, where one guy admires the other. I think Mr. Trump admires Putin more than Putin does admire Mr. Trump. And then there's this, what I call the official agenda, things that are really important to clear. I think you're going to see different statements by, the White House versus what Trump will say during or after the summit. It's all going to be good for Mr. Trump, doesn't matter how bad it goes. Mr. Putin will make promises to Mr. Trump, perhaps, that he will never keep. I mean, Mr. Trump is in for an interesting ride because when it comes to substance, Putin is just going to lie to his face. And he's going to let Mr. Trump run with that. Putin is going to flatter Mr. Trump. And he's very good in making believe what he has to say and that he comes across as a very sincere, very open, very honest person. And Mr. Trump will learn the hard way that he cannot trust Vladimir Putin.
Oh, that's so interesting because he seems to be learning that lesson all over the place, and he doesn't seem to learn it. It's there for him, for the case, but then he just, this thing with North Korea is just absolutely hilarious as far as I'm concerned. But we talked a little bit about style, or I should say you did. Most Americans think that Trump is spontaneous and he's seemingly ill-prepared, and our image of Putin is a man of meticulousness. You know Putin, and you've already said he's not as prepared as people like to think he is. You actually, I think, were indicating he wings it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, when he's like a bureaucrat in that respect. He will deal with an issue when it's on the table, not a day before that, not an hour before that. And then he will go out and do something about it, but only if he cannot avoid this whole issue altogether. And that's how Putin operates. And he doesn't waste a moment of time on stuff that's not, time critical per se.
So let's get to this. First of all, which of the two men are more at risk? I would assume, and I think you've even said or intimated that the bigger risk was to Trump than it was to Putin. But what are the individual risks for each of these men? Let's start with Putin on this meeting.
I think with Putin, the immediate risk is that he no longer can keep up the deal that he struck with his friends. They keep him in power with the intel services, with the military, etc. All these guys are out, making money. It's not so much about a political decision. Having a position in the government, in the bureaucracy, in the services is foremost important for one thing, to make money for them and their families. When they can't get to that money, Mr. Putin is at real risk, and all types of good stuff could happen. Whereas with Mr. Trump, I think the biggest risk that I see is that he's not taking things too seriously. For example, the Mueller investigation. I don't see that as something that he takes particularly seriously. And with all the itty-gritty stuff, I'm not talking about that the things that are investigated are necessarily true when it comes to Mr. Trump as a person. But I think the process of covering up everybody else's activities could really hand him in a hot seat, per se.
Off subject slightly, but do you see Trump surviving 4 years, or you think they'll impeach him?
I'll see him surviving 8 years. To be honest with you, I don't see anybody out there who could actually pick a fight with Mr. Trump and win it. Not per verbum, and certainly not during elections. And when I travel through America still today, and I've made 5 trips just this year, and within the last 12 months, I guarantee you that most of the people that I talk to actually like what Mr. Trump is doing, even though most of them might not understand the implication it sometimes has, but they're all for it because it's basically showing the Washington establishment that they're not happy about that. It's more a protest-type scenario than anything else. It's not so much that they prefer Trump, the person, as what Trump is doing, trying to uproot the system.
Well, look, one thing I will say to you, and I get to talk to different people all day long and travel, carry on. What I will say is that the very people who voted for Trump are getting the most screwed by the policies he's putting in place in order to fuel his own corporation. And his friends' corporations. So that's problematic to me, that these Americans are so ill-informed, or they're so mentally ill that they turn a blind eye to the very thing that's hurting them. I mean, that's,
Right. No, I hear you. I give you that, absolutely. And that is something else which I find fascinating. Whatever the man says or whatever the man does, I mean, most people really don't take that negatively, which is surprising. I mean, when I look at your healthcare problem, as a German, for me, it's just crazy that the biggest industrial nation in the world cannot get Medicare under control per se. I mean, you have to imagine the Germans were the ones that came up with the first Medicare system in the world in the 1880s under Mr. Bismarck, who was the most conservative, pro-emperor, not a Democrat, but he realized that if he lets the Social Democrats prevail by criticizing the fact that no one has health care, that eventually these left-wing liberals could win. So he decided to implement a medical system that secures everyone from child to old, from worker to industrialist. Everybody has the same platform to get treatment. And this system has been around, nearly 100, more than 100 years. And here we are in 2018, and America can't do it. Just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, it is unbelievable. And it's because the picture that a lot of these Americans who are voting against their own interest have is only the one portrayed by the Trump propaganda network, Fox News, or Rush Limbaugh, because it's a wedge issue. It becomes that they turn everything into a wedge issue. I do want to say this, though, that's so fascinating. Just a couple of days ago, the UN tried to pass a pro-breastfeeding. Now, I bring that up because the people who stopped it were the Trumps. Why did Trump stop it? He stopped it because he didn't want it affecting his cronies who were making $1 gazillion on formula for babies. Everything in this country is about business. It's capitalism imploding. That's my answer to your dilemma as to why Americans are so stupid about passing universal health care, or however you want to call it. Because this country is a capitalist, wackadoodle capitalist society. We've got a Supreme Court decision that said that businesses are people too. Right. I don't see them having breasts or what else, other human parts. But they are. Businesses are people too, and that is the problem in America that you have. That's it in a nutshell. It's capitalism gone awry.
On the other hand side, I'm always surprised because we had this Obamacare thing. So I have this really good friend. I've been friends with him for over 30 years. He's in bad health. He doesn't have a lot of money. And I basically said, man, now you got Obamacare, just reading it in the newspaper some years ago. And I said, how about that? And he says, I hate it. I said, what do you mean you hate it? You can get actual treatment, practically not free of charge, but at least it's an affordable care type scenario. And he said he doesn't like it because he doesn't get a choice, which is something I couldn't understand for the life of me.
Hello, right?
And now you have this scenario where another good friend of mine, a lady that paid, I don't know, $350 for her insurance every month, they raised it to like $1,800 overnight.
Well, that was Trump. But that's Trump.
But that's the thing. I was looking at that, and since Trump has not been doing anything with this health care thing, it must be an effect of Obamacare.
No.
Or not.
No.
I don't know.
No. What Trump did is they legislated. They wouldn't give money into the system that was part of how it was all set up. So they've been slowly, go and read up on this because this is well worth your time.
Right. I will.
Yeah, because what they've been doing is slowly sabotaging. They did something today or yesterday on this, little by little by little. And the thing that's so sad about it is, it was the whole idea for universal health care, by the way, was a Republican idea that the Democrats grabbed back from them. But everything that Trump does has to do with getting back at the Clintons and at Obama. Anything that they like CHIP, which is she started the children's food program. It's been in place ever since she was first lady. Nope, he's going to abolish it because he's going to finish her off because that's the personality this guy has. You talked about this. You and I off air talked about this. Let's talk about it on air. The both of these people, their inability to empathize. I mean, the two of them are as cold as frozen lobsters. I mean, this president I have is willing to throw babies of like 1 day old into a cage and starve to death and get lice. How sick is he?
Again, in a way, everything seems to become a matter of principle these days and no longer is a matter of common sense. And one thing I know, though, something must have gotten to Mr. Trump because he basically ended this routine to separate kids from their parents when they crossed the border illegally, etc. So even he got the message, it seems.
Well, yeah, it was called polls.
Right. So there you can see people have a voice, and he will listen to that voice when it becomes loud enough. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I actually don't think let me interject. I don't think it was the polls actually that did him in. I think it was his wife who said, you do this, and I'll cut off your you-know-what. And and I'm saying that because ever since that, when she went down to the border and to the places, I call him, forgive me, you're German, you'll appreciate this probably better than anybody. I call him Herr Hitler, and I call her Eva Braun. There's a phenomenal picture of Hitler and Braun sitting with children at their feet.
Right.
You know that picture. And that's what I call the two of them, because that's the game they play. I mean, everybody was sympathetic with her. Please, she's in this hook, line, and sinker. But whatever happened that day that she went down there, she is now holding his hand and looking in his eyes with, oh, I love you. I mean, Eva and Hitler are on their friends again. They made up. Well, must have been a hell of a makeup.
She's an immigrant, so she can feel with what's going on, Interesting for me as a German again. You couldn't walk the German streets and work being an undocumented illegal alien. That's just not possible here. But that has been the common practice in America in many industries, I think, including agriculture, of course, and others, benefited from that. Now they're enforcing the laws, and it becomes such an issue of principle that common sense seems to leave everybody. And that is a pity.
You'll be happy to know that just yesterday, Mar-a-Lago, who, the estate private club that Trump owns, just put in a thing to get illegal immigrants to come in and help him because nobody wants to work for 2 cents to wait tables and clean up the whatever. What's good for the goose?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just it's very, very, very bizarre. Question: Any chance in your head that some miracle does occur on the 16th and something really phenomenal comes out of this meeting?
Yeah, like lightning hits both guys. I'm just kidding.
I'm not. I wish you're right. The world would be a better place.
No, I don't think so. But all joke aside, I think the thing will be, and you're gonna see this, and you're gonna listen to this during and after the summit. Mr. Trump will say that's the best meeting he's ever had in his life, and then this situation from a high will become a very, very much a low. I don't imagine, or I can't imagine, what Mr. Trump would do if he would find out that Putin is just putting him on. When he comes to that realization, what's Mr. Trump going to do? That's going to be interesting.
I think the two of them are the two craziest human beings walking the face of the earth. And to have them in one place, talking head-to-head, face-to-face, is going to be amazing. Just amazing. I really, really do. I want to mention this. Appearing on Russia's state TV, by the way, Senator John Thune and Shelby, Senator Shelby also, claimed that Russia is not our adversary, but our, quote-unquote, competitor, which, by the way, Trump, I think this morning, reiterated. Trump also has said now, Putin meeting may be the easiest of them all. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. Which competitor? Russia has 1/20th of the U.S. GDP, for starters. Russia is not a free society, literally, in every sense of the word. Russia has no independent judiciary in any sense of the word. So this is not a competition. This is a complete different model. It's a despotic dictatorship at best. And so I don't see that Russia could compete on the world stage with the United States and the West. They can pinpoint. They can do their little internet games. They can, invade one country at a time for a limited period of time, but they can never finish a conflict, and they can never appease anything, per se. They're just going to make it worse. But they have to involve themselves, so that in their eyes, that will put them back on the world map, on the political world map in decision-making. So they have to be sitting, they get their seat on the table to negotiate something, perhaps. But to say it's a competitor, I think, is just not the right thing to say.
But that gets me to another point, which is, really, Putin is a has-been. If you think about it, he manages to play everybody, not just the U.S. I think we've established that. That being said, the country's in financial ruin. What kind of power do they really have? They got an army that's not worth what it used to be. Yeah, an air force, etc. All of that. So Trump putting him as a competitor, which makes him equal, and saying, "I'll go and I'll meet you in Helsinki." What? Why do it?
Well, look at Mr. Kim from North Korea. What he said about him before.
Well, I said the same thing.
And now he's a better pal than what's your basketball player that's friends with him.
Well, yeah, right. The blonde guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is just hilarious in a way, because again, Kim is another one of these guys. I mean, he promises Trump what he wants to hear, and he's never going to deliver what Mr. Trump wants him to deliver. It's not going to happen.
So, knowing Putin as you've known him, knowing Trump from the way you're observing all of this, at the end of the day, where are we on all of this? Is this just like a big grand joke? Is this just... What is going on here, Franz?
You literally have to take it one day at a time. As long as we understand what Putin is, what Russia is, and I'm not talking about the Russian people. I'm talking the people that are in charge of running that country. This kleptocracy, this dictatorship. And we were dealing successfully with the Soviet Union, and there's no reason why we could not contain Russia. And that's the only thing we can do right now, is to contain Russia. We cannot allow Russia to get out of its cage, so to speak. And that's the most important thing. We should treat it like a Cold War scenario, and we should be ready for anything.
We should be prepared for anything. All right, closing. Yeah. What are you most afraid of in all of this?
The thing that I'm afraid of, literally speaking, is that Putin, in his illusion of grandeur, trying to stir up dirt again, is going to try to march into the Baltic republics, for example. That'd be something that really would put it to the test, because these are NATO members, and when they get attacked, we have to stand up for that. And now the problem is not so much him invading there, but what will we do about it? What are we ready to defend? I mean, speaking as a German, we have 6 submarines in Germany. Guess how many submarines are seaworthy right now out of 6?
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Not a single one. Not a single one.
Jesus.
They don't have spare parts. We have jet planes that won't fly. We have warships that don't go to sea. We are in bad shape because we're not putting any money into it. The U.S. is spending lots of money on its military, but I have a hard time imagining that they will carry the brunt of the load if it ever comes to a conflict like that. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Well, that certainly is extraordinarily interesting. From your vantage point, how do you see all of this playing out in America? I mean, there are people in this country who are talking civil war, and I'm not exaggerating. They are in the throes of American government. The D.C. people, hysterical.
I know it's hysterical, but at the same time, as long as they're only talking, that's fine. The problem is this hatred over certain subjects just seems to grow with people, and there's always fanatics on either side of the aisle.
Well, the fanatics are in control. The crazies are in charge of the asylum right now, including Trump.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you're laughing, but
I know, because I have to laugh because sometimes you can only laugh. You know what I mean? It's hard to grasp it. But the point is, I mean, you have the largest democracy in the world, one of the older democracies in the world, and people must come to terms again. And one way of doing it, sorry to say, but it also is the realization that the United States is better than other countries as a democracy, as a place for where human rights are observed, where you have an independent judiciary. These are achievements, and it would be such a pity to lose part of that over political partisan issues. I mean, they have to come back together eventually. And sometimes the best way of doing that is to have an outside enemy that, you concentrate on.
So Putin serves that purpose? He's the outside enemy?
Not yet, but he's working on it.
And on that note, to be continued, thank you, Franz. We couldn't top that last line no matter how we tried. Thank you. I've been speaking with Franz Sedelmayer. His book is Welcome to Putingrad, the incredible story of the only man to collect money from Vladimir Putin. For more information on Franz Sedelmayer and for info on how to purchase his book, visit his website at WelcomeToPutingrad.com. Thank you so much for tuning in to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. Be sure to tune in to Talkish Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, when new podcasts are posted at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and on all your favorite apps. We are open 24/7. So, until next time, when we meet again, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.